So I guess today I have to talk about Ubisoft. It's the hottest story going on right now in the video game industry is the really bad financial situation Ubisoft appears to be in, and obviously the entire controversy surrounding their new game, Assassin's Creed Shadows, which recently got delayed. So, I'm not going to rehash everything with Assassin's Creed Shadows. I'm sure the vast majority of you are well informed as to everything going on with that and all the different controversies that game has received between the Black Samurai protagonist, them using Chinese architecture in their so-called feudal Japanese game, them releasing a Torigate figurine, which in Japanese culture is reminiscent of the Nagasaki bombing, and at the last minute they canceled their scheduled appearance at the Tokyo Game Show, probably because they wanted to avoid any type of questions or any negative press from the Japanese, because it's a game that is really not being received well over there because of the various historical inaccuracies and the overall feeling that this game does not do Japan any justice. So, you've heard all that before, but I just want to talk about Ubisoft as a whole, and why it really seems like they are practically on the verge of bankruptcy, and we might have another THQ on our hands, and they might just be completely gone in the next few years, because I see a lot of similarities between Ubisoft today and THQ in 2010, 2011, when they were just on their last legs and about to shut down. Because this whole Assassin's Creed thing, you're not even scratching the surface with that. And, initially I was confused because, honestly, I wasn't really following the whole Ubisoft, Assassin's Creed shit because I am not a fan of Assassin's Creed. The last game that I played in the series was Assassin's Creed Revelations, but only the online multiplayer. I didn't play any of the single player, so I really had no interest in what they were doing with Assassin's Creed and what the controversies were. I was admittedly confused, though, the other day when it was announced that the game was getting delayed, and I just saw overwhelmingly negative reception to that and towards Ubisoft. I'm like, wait a minute, aren't we in favor of games being delayed and them doing the right thing? They even canceled everyone's pre-order so they'd have to pre-order the game again because they're completely restructuring how pre-orders are done, because you pre-ordered the gold edition and it came with early access and season pass. Well, apparently they're not doing season passes anymore, and apparently they're not doing early access anymore, and now the game's coming out day one on Steam when it was originally locked down to the Epic Game Store and the shitty Ubisoft launcher. So they're making a lot of steps in the right direction. So I'm like, why is everyone still just shitting on Ubisoft when they're listening to people? They're not a perfect company, but they're listening to people and they're doing the right thing. And then I realize that it's a culmination of everything that Ubisoft has done and everything that's been happening with all of their games over the past, I would say, 5 years or so. Things have really not been good. It's been failure after failure after failure after failure. This year alone, you had 3 massive failures from Ubisoft. They, of course, started the year off with their quadruple A experience, Skull and Bones, and it pretty much speaks for itself how horrible that game did. I think it currently has 300 or so concurrent players on Steam, so that tells you a lot. And then they came out with X Defiant around May of this year, and initially people, there were a lot of people playing it when it first came out because it was a free-to-play online shooter. Those games initially attract a large player base, but it very quickly fizzled out, and now the future of the game is very uncertain. They just came out with Season 2 the other day, and it seems like the game's already cooked, and there's not much to look forward to there. It just felt for a lot of players like it could have used more time in the oven, could have used more polish, and that's after multiple delays. So the fact that, they're delaying Assassin's Creed Shadows, but they're only delaying it by 3 months until February. That's not really enough time to fundamentally change the game and make it great compared to what the final product would have been if it just released in November like originally planned. And then, of course, very recently you had the Star Wars Outlaws fiasco with people who got the early access and they had to start a brand new save, losing 20 hours plus of gameplay, and that whole and just the game itself being fucking shit. We've all seen the gameplay, we've all seen the memes. I don't need to, spend another 5 minutes just talking about that shit. But you guys get the idea. They haven't had very many successes in the past, it's not just this year, but 5 years. Name all the big Ubisoft releases we've had since 2019, 2020. It either falls into one of two categories. Either the game is a complete failure, in the case of the games that I just mentioned that came out this year, or the game does okay enough, and it makes a little bit of profit, doesn't light the world on fire, but it does enough to be considered not a financial failure. Think of the Avatar game that came out last year, Assassin's Creed Mirage that came out last year, Far Cry 6, and the Crew Motorfest also did pretty well, but then, of course, they had to burn bridge with the entire community by, what they did with the Crew 1, shutting it down. And I guess Just Dance still does pretty good. But if you take the sample size of all the different games, all the big releases that they've had, it's more failure than success. I'm even thinking of other games that I haven't even thought of in years that were big failures. Watch Dogs Legion, Hyperscape. Remember Hyperscape? That was their answer to Warzone and Apex. I think it lasted maybe a year and a half, 2 years before it shut down. Rainbow Six Extraction. And this just isn't sustainable, having all of their major projects, not all of them, but seemingly most of them, just not do all that well. Not have a lot of people playing it, not making a lot of money. And the thing with Ubisoft is that, people talk about other companies, obviously, like EA and Activision, which I guess is now an extension of Microsoft, but all these big companies, Take-Two, and they all have their own controversies, but Ubisoft seemingly just has so much more now. Like, it's just on a whole nother level, as far as the people's perception of the quality of the games that they're releasing and their business practices and everything. Like, back when I was, really starting to get into gaming around the late 2000s, early 2010s, EA was by far the most hated company. Now it's definitely Ubisoft. I mean, EA is a company that is obviously flawed. They have a lot of games that come out and they're not in a very good state, especially their sports titles. Madden is just, at this point, please put it out of its misery. But the thing is with Madden is that it still generates a shit ton of money. The games that people say are horrible from EA actually, for the most part, end up making a lot of money, so they're fine financially. I mean, Battlefield 2042 could have been, that game didn't do as well as they hoped for, and it wasn't very good, but even that game alone compared to most of these Ubisoft titles, it's not even close. And, Madden and the EA football game, whatever it's called now because they lost the rights to the FIFA name, and UFC and all these other different titles, as hated as they are by the community, they still make a fuck ton of money, billions of dollars every year. You could say the same thing with Activision and Call of Duty. It still makes a shit ton of money. And Take-Two, they could just literally sit on the cash that the shark cards from Grand Theft Auto Online generate and call it a day and don't even have to worry. But Ubisoft they're not really in the same position as those other companies I just mentioned. They don't have that thing that will keep them afloat no matter what, that will just generate them money regardless of whatever happens. Because those games, with those other companies, you have games that have controversies that are not received well or whatever. They have negative backlash by the community, but they still make a lot of money. But Ubisoft games get negative attention and they don't sell well. And that's reflective when you look at the stock prices. If you compare EA stock to Ubisoft stock, EA is down 3% over the past month, but up 20% over the past year, and up 50% over the past 5 years, while Ubisoft stock is down 50% over the past month, 66% over the past year, and 85% over the past 5 years. So this isn't just hyperbole, it's not just people being overly dramatic, because I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of different videos popping up about Ubisoft being in a very dire situation. I mean, the numbers don't lie. That's exactly what's happening. And I think the way things are playing out right now, I don't know that Ubisoft can turn things around. I genuinely don't think they can, honestly. I think one of two things is likely going to happen over the next, I'd say 3 to 5 years. Either the company's going to file for Chapter 11, just like THQ did, and then the company's assets and their individual IPs will each be up individually for auction, and different companies will buy the different IPs. So, when THQ went bankrupt, you had a bunch of different companies buying each individual IP. So you had a company called Deep Silver that bought Saints Row and the Metro franchise. Then you had Crytek, which for some reason decided to buy Homefront. Take-Two bought Evolve, which was originally under THQ. Sega bought the Warhammer series, and Ubisoft got the South Park license from THQ. So I could see something similar happening with Ubisoft, where let's say EA gets Assassin's Creed, Microsoft gets Rainbow Six, Take-Two has Far Cry, something like that. Like each individual IP is sold off at auction during bankruptcy, and something like that takes place. Or the entire company can be purchased outright by a different company. Probably not Microsoft, though, because I don't think the regulators would be okay with them swallowing up yet another big video game company, because they already have Bethesda, they already have Activision. I don't think they'd be able to get away with getting another big publisher under their umbrella as well. But I think that the first possibility is probably the more likely one, because to just buy the entire company, there's a lot of, like, I don't think there might not be as much interest in that as there would be to just, for each company to make a bid on each individual IP and for them to go through the whole bankruptcy thing. I don't think they'd be able to find a buyer, honestly, because I think it's just like a sinking ship. It's like the Titanic. You don't want to be the captain of the Titanic as soon as the iceberg gets hit, so I don't think that would be the outcome. Who knows, though? I don't think that Ubisoft, as we know it, though, can survive and sustain itself. That I think is very clear at this point. I mean, compare them to what they were in the late 2000s. They were firing on all cylinders. They had so many games that they were pumping out, and they were making a lot of money. Assassin's Creed, Rainbow Six, Splinter Cell, Ghost Recon, not to mention all the DS and Wii games that they made a shit ton of money on as well back then. If you guys, were playing DS and Wii games back then, Ubisoft put out a lot of third-party games for those platforms, and a lot of them did really well, like Rayman Raving Rabbids, if you remember that game. I mean, that shit was fucking huge. Every friend's house that I ever went to back then had a copy of that game, and it was really big. And they had a whole bunch of other games, too. Like, it just was so different back then. Ubisoft was so different, and they, not only did they not have as much baggage to them, like, not as much negative attention, you didn't really hear a whole lot of that back then. It was really, again, mostly targeted towards EA at the time, but they were definitely making a lot more money, and they were in a much healthier financial situation during the late 2000s to mid 2010s. Absolutely. I mean, they could try to be, like, present themselves as more pro-consumer and do all these different things, but I think if the money's not there, the money's not there, and they're already bleeding so much money, they're hemorrhaging cash at this point, that even if they decide, okay, we're going to change course and we're going to really try to win people over, how long is that going to take? And, by the time it happens, it might be too little too late. So, yeah, I don't see them lasting much longer. I think they got 3 to 5 years tops, and then they're either going to be sold off, go bankrupt, or whatever. Something's going to happen because it's not going to last much longer the way it is.